The Lord of the Rings trilogy is turning 25 this year, and to celebrate, they are being released back into theaters for a limited time. So me and my friends made our way to the theater on 3 separate days because the theater didn't want to dedicate 12 plus hours in one day, the cowards, and it was an awesome experience. I fell in love with these films from the first time I saw them, only it wasn't in a theater, it was on a small computer screen, sitting on a bench with my cousin in his dad's basement. I've loved them ever since, but I always wanted the chance to see them in theaters. To get the theater experience that so many fans had, but I didn't because I wasn't old enough to know or care when they were first released in 2001. So I was beyond excited to see them in the theater. A chance to live the nostalgia moment I had longed for, and as I walked out of Return of the King, I realized something. I will never experience a film like that ever again. Not because of the anticipation and the hype, but because Lord of the Rings is where film peaked. There have been plenty of ambitious and even great films released since, and I'm sure there are more on the way. Christopher Nolan's Odyssey is the first that comes to mind, but none of them will compare to The Lord of the Rings, a franchise that took nearly 8 years in total production time, including one of the most monstrous pre-productions I've ever heard of. A film franchise that created brand new special effects and CGI that still looks incredible today, partially because it was used so sparingly, while production created everything they could in real life. Sets and miniatures were painstakingly built for both interior and exterior establishing shots. Armor, weapons, and makeup were created for thousands of extras, and green screens only used when absolutely necessary, using forced perspective and stand-ins wherever possible. I could rant on and on about the production of these films, but it's what's behind the production that made them so great. Every film begins with a script, and adapting one of the best-selling and most beloved novels in history was an extremely daunting task. Not just because of the scope and scale of the story, but the legions of fans who had come to love Tolkien's work and had high expectations. Expectations that Peter Jackson placed on his cast, his crew, and himself. This was not something they could afford to screw up. That level of seriousness and love for the source material is what led to all the work that went into creating these films. Could they have cut corners and saved money on makeup and sets? Sure, but they didn't because they had a love and dedication to the story they were telling. All the interviews I've ever seen from Jackson and his crew show a group of people who cared deeply about the story they were telling. And this is where my point comes in. There will probably never be another film like this, ever again. Not because the technology or the knowledge of how to do it doesn't exist, but because films aren't made this way anymore. Gone are the days when this amount of care would be put into a film. Gone are the days where actors would sit in a makeup chair for hours on end just to film a few minutes worth of runtime. And gone are the days of writers and directors deciding that the only messages in their films are the universal ones found in the source material. In fact, gone are the days of respecting source material, instead focusing on updating it for a modern audience. An audience that can't let a film challenge any of their own preconceived notions about morality, sexuality, race, or other identifiers that they want to complain about. All the work that was put into The Lord of the Rings just isn't put into films anymore, because the care of the story doesn't exist anymore. But all that care and work that was put into these films, it paid off. The entire series went on to win 17 Oscars, including 11 for Return of the King alone, and grossing nearly $3 billion, on a total budget of $281 million for the franchise. Meanwhile, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom cost nearly $200 million more, and that film is a hot piece of garbage that makes me want God to remove my higher brain functions. The Lord of the Rings was able to do more with so much less than modern films, and it was so impactful that people are asking for the 12-plus hour extended cut to be released back into theaters and filling those seats 25 years later. From everything I've been able to find from the time that these films were originally released, they were built up to be what film was supposed to be moving forward, to be the first in a brand new age of filmmaking that pushed the art form to its very limits. But they weren't. This isn't where filmmaking found its stride, it's where filmmaking peaked. You may not like the Lord of the Rings series, but this is where filmmaking as an art form plateaued. Have there been good films since? Of course, but every art form has a peak where the quality of everything after is diminished by comparison. It eventually becomes derivative, self referential, and ultimately bland and culturally irrelevant before a new form of art inevitably takes its place. And while we might not be at the bottom of the valley, we've certainly passed the peak, and The Lord of the Rings was it. I absolutely love these films, and I'll continue to watch them for the rest of my life, and I'll show them to my kids because they're just that good. When I was watching these films again, a line from Gandalf struck me harder than it ever has before. It's when he takes Pippin to Minas Tirith in Return of the King, and he's telling him about the decay of Gondor, that it was caused by men caring more about their dead ancestors than their own children, and creating graves more beautiful than the houses that they lived in themselves. And it just made me really sad because I realized that's what we do now. Not so much on the creating beautiful graves better than houses front, but all of our culture is referential to the past. Remakes, readaptations of old material, that's what movies are. We pine for these good old days in every aspect of life. Even our politicians drone on about the past and either having to go back and correct its wrongs or go back to the way things were. There's no striving forward. There's no desire to create something new, something better, only to take what was once good and change it, dismissing the truth of what it was in its entirety and leaving us with these bland and hollow stories with no desire to better ourselves. Hell, my whole goal with YouTube is to tell stories. Not to instill this pining for the past, but an inspiration and motivation to go out and do something incredible with your own life, just like the people that came before you. I honestly don't care that much about Ernest Shackleton or Kelly Johnson or even Tolkien, not as much as I care about the people I see out in the world today, because those men already lived their lives. They already made something of themselves, and they helped create a world that was better than the world they were born into. And I just want people to be inspired to do the same thing for themselves today. So that in 50 years, my grandkids are learning about the amazing so-and-so who made this amazing piece of art that the world fell in love with. And it helped usher in a new age of culture that made the Lord of the Rings trilogy look like a student film. And I realize that I'm saying that in the same video where I told you that I had this desire to experience these films in theaters, just like everybody who saw them back in 2001. But I know that the experience of seeing these films for the first time in theaters is not something I could ever recreate. It's gone, and I have to move forward with a hope and desire for better experiences and better life. And I hope that we as a society can wake up and one day be able to start caring more about our future than we do our past. And maybe we can create something not as good as Lord of the Rings, but better. But until that day comes, I'll keep watching them, and maybe I'll make a video going into autistic detail about how amazing they really are. But until then, go live a story worth telling, and I'll see you in the next one. The end.
Said, I imagine this took place in England and Europe some 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. And so we thought, okay, so what we'll do with the movie is we will pretend that this is history, just as if we were making an ancient Roman film or making Braveheart, about Sir William Wallace, that we'll pretend that these guys existed. It's history. It was real. That let's make the movie with that weight of authenticity in the designs, the look, the performances, everything. So that was our mantra.